Hello, this is Dr. Heather Lee, and this is a discussion about classroom management, part 5. And we are in the second part, towards the end, talking about how to establish effective routines and procedures for our students in the classroom. And we've discussed the importance of having those rules, those procedures, how you come up with them. And now let's talk about how you can actually implement them. And one thing that we fail to do, especially as we teach older students, is we think that if I just say it once, they'll know what I mean and they'll always do it, that it's that clear. But instead, you really need to teach your students and model. That means you show them, don't just say it, but show them, and then reinforce and have them practice what it is you're asking them to do. So don't make the mistake of just day one going over the rules and thinking that that's it, you've been as clear as you can be. But you actually should teach them. And here are some of the things that you should think through, that you should have a routine procedure for all of these. How will students get your attention? Are they going to raise hands, or are you doing some other method? How will they come into the classroom and leave the classroom at the beginning and end of the period? How do they get materials that they need? How do they leave the classroom if they need to leave to use the restroom? Is there going to be a procedure for that? Do they just get up and go? Reacting to a visitor or an intercom announcement, very important thing for you to think through and teach your students what you want them to do. When they come in late or leave early, if you don't have a set way that works, it will be a disruption to your classroom. It'll stop the teaching every single time it happens. So make sure you're clear about how to do that. Consequences for inappropriate behavior. In other words, you tell them exactly what you're going to do and how you're going to do it well in advance so that they know. Emergency situations. You need to practice whether it's a fire drill or if it's a real fire or a bomb threat, all those things. You need to teach and practice how to handle each of those things. Now, another area that you need to think through is how you're going to manage your class sessions. So not only do you have your routines and procedures, you've been very clear about what you expect, but there are some things you can do as a teacher that will help to prevent problems in your classroom. First one is using your time really well. You are on the job. You should be businesslike and yet personal, but it should be a professional type of environment. Your dress and your tone are very important. You set the stage for your classroom. You also should have a pretty quick pace of activities. You don't want to go so fast that they don't get it, that you're not taking time to practice and review and all that you need to do. But you should go from one thing to another without having dead time or without you wondering what you're going to do next. And one wonderful way to start a class is by having a bell activity or a warm-up. And this is when your students walk into the classroom, there's something automatically that they open up their notebook and start doing immediately. Or you could have it begin as soon as the bell rings. That's when you expect everybody to be in their seat working on the bell activity or the warm-up. Or the do now. Some teachers call it a do now. This allows you to do any little technical thing you need to take care of, making sure everybody's there, and starting off much more smoothly when you have students in their seats and quietly working on something. Then during your lesson, you want it to come off very smoothly. You want to have a purpose for everything you're doing, keep that quick pace, have natural transitions from one thing to the other, and really help your students to see how things are connected to each other. So your directions are very important. They should be clear, but you shouldn't go on and on and on about what your directions are. Avoid interruptions, avoiding distractions, and then helping students to follow each part of the lesson. And one of the hardest areas for teachers is transitions. And in your class period, there are probably 20 different transitions in each 40-minute class period. Sometimes there are less, maybe 4 or 5. But these are the moments in between an activity or a topic. Maybe you're having students take out their textbook, or you're collecting the homework, or you're transitioning from collecting homework into the beginning of your lesson. All of those are transitions, and they're very challenging for new teachers. So the way you need to approach them is by carefully thinking it through, visualizing it, picturing it, eliminating any times when your students have to wait. That is a dangerous area for new teachers. And then I highly encourage you, when you write your first lesson plans, when you teach your first lessons, write out what you're going to say for a transition, and so that it's very clear and you can just quickly tell your students what to put away, what to do, how much time they have to do it, and you don't have to flub your way through it. And that will help you to be more confident about it and you to execute it more clearly and for things to go smoother with your transitions. So we're going to go directly from this part 2 about expectations and about those routines and procedures into part 3. And this is how to manage student misbehavior. This is what people classically think of when they think of classroom management. But remember, there's so much more that comes before this. We're going to talk about 3 things yet again. We're going to talk about levels of misbehavior, different teacher responses, and then how to be an assertive teacher. That's the kind of teacher you should be. So first, we need to recognize that there are different levels of misbehavior. First, you have small things. These things don't disrupt too much. Maybe it's someone that's fooling around, they're not paying attention, chatting with a neighbor, or they're off task for a little bit. Now, I'm not saying those things aren't important because they can interfere with student learning, but this is kind of the small stuff. You want to have guidelines for it, you want to be consistent, but recognize that this is not a terrible, terrible, terrible thing happening. Then you have a next level of when what students are doing actually disrupts class. It stops what they're doing. Talking out of turn, they're out of their seat, or they're clowning around so much, maybe they're wanting to get the class's attention, make the class laugh, and it pulls attention away from what you're doing. So do you see how that's kind of a step up because they're actually disrupting the class? Then you have another big leap ahead when a student is disrespectful. They're being defiant, maybe saying, talking back in a way, calling you a name, cheating, lying, stealing. Okay, this is definitely a much more serious level than those first and second ones. And then you even have another level of violence. And it's obvious just looking at those different levels that you need to have different ways of handling each of them. You're not always going to start with a small consequence. If violence is an issue, you're going to have immediate, fast consequences, and you need to know beforehand how you're going to handle those things. So let's talk about what do you actually do. Okay, what do you do when your students start talking out of turn, or you feel like you're losing their control, or you have a student who's really challenging you? All right. First, keep the goal in mind, the big picture. And that big picture is you want to intervene, that means you want to step in and redirect the student's focus with the least amount of classroom disturbance. Okay? You want to get right back into the lesson and what you're doing with as little disturbance as possible. Okay, so that's the goal to keep in mind as we go forward. And there are 3 ways that you may approach it. You could be a hostile teacher, one who loses her temper, one who says things she doesn't mean, or is very controlling and maybe even gets so angry and upset with the student's misbehavior. That's a hostile teacher, not good. You may be an assertive teacher. That's what we're going to talk about and what you should be. Or you may be non-assertive or passive. You kind of let far too many things go because maybe you're not confident. Maybe you're afraid of that student. Maybe you don't know how to do it. Maybe you've never seen it done. So you decide not to do anything at all. And that is not a good thing either. You will quickly lose control of your class. And I think you will not stay a teacher very long at all. So you want to hone in assertive teaching skills. Now, listen to these descriptions of an assertive teacher. Assertive teachers uphold student-established rules. They address and correct students who violate behavioral expectations. They respond immediately to disruptive student behavior. They discourage students from hurting each other physically or emotionally. They establish and apply a set of consequences to misbehaving students. They protect students' rights to learn. They explain to misbehaving students why their behavior is inappropriate, and they involve parents and administrators when student behavior is chronic or dangerous. Take a look again at those verbs, okay? Because being an assertive teacher is something that you do. And there are things like upholding rules, addressing students, responding, discouraging poor behavior, establishing, protecting, explaining, involving. It's a lot of work to be an assertive teacher, but this is what you need to do in order to have a type of classroom where student learning is the focus. Now, when it's time to intervene, there is an order of how you should intervene. And as I've mentioned before, you want to start with things that are indirect and then lead to more direct things. So remember that goal that you want to focus your students' attention with the least amount of disturbance possible. So the first thing you want to do, suppose a student is talking to a neighbor, you want to do something indirect. One is proximity. That means how close you are. And you want to be close to misbehavior. So think in your head, walk towards misbehavior. Don't walk away and pretend it's not happening. Walk towards the behavior. And many times a step or two in their direction and it'll stop. Eye contact. Gesturing, maybe a little nod of your head, saying no but not even having to say anything. Your body posture or using silence. All of those are indirect methods. And these all have to do with a concept that I call teacher presence. It is a very important thing for you to develop as a teacher. When someone walks into the classroom, it's pretty clear who's in charge. You are only one person, and you may have 25 students in your classroom, but you as the teacher should fill that classroom with your presence. You need to be the one who is managing what's going on. And everybody kind of feels your presence, even though you can only be in one place at one time. It's the idea that students know you know what's going on, no matter where you are. You're always looking around. So some things you can do are being tall and confident, just in the way that you stand, by moving around a lot, not getting stuck behind a podium or behind your desk, but constantly moving around while you teach or while students are working. Moving toward problems, practice it. That's difficult to do. Using your eyes, looking right at your students in their eyes. And then a step further than that is practicing what's called the look. You need to have a look that says to your students, I mean business. All right? I know that mine, I've practiced it for many years. I lift up my eyebrows. I stare right at them. I get very still. And there's a look on my face that says, excuse me, and I'm not saying anything at all. So you need to have what that look looks like for you. And another thing that can go along with that look is the pause. This is where maybe you're giving directions or you're teaching, and then all of a sudden, you just stop because there's some kind of a disruption. And when you stop, after a few seconds, the students are like, what's going on? And they look around, and usually things settle back down and they're back looking at you. And when you can combine those two, the look with the pause, it is very powerful and a very effective way to get students back on task. And you haven't even had to say a word. These are all indirect strategies. Now, when the indirect doesn't work and you need to go to the next level, then you would do something more direct, okay? You want to start, again, with a simple type of direct one, maybe where you just simply say a name, John, or a reminder of the guidelines. Class, I'm the one who dismisses, not the bell. Please have a seat. Just simple, and private is always the way to go with students. Then, following the rules and procedures as outlined in your management system. This is being more direct, where you have a consequence laid out in advance, and you say, you had already said this is what is going to happen when you have interrupted my classroom 3 times in the same period, and you do it, okay? But you do it in as private a manner as possible. All right, we'll pause there before we head into our final video.